This is the All Rev'd Up podcast, and I'm Reverend Emmett Price.
And I'm Reverend Irene Monroe.
Now, Irene, I know you want to give the folks a tsunami, so come on and hit us with that tsunami.
Okay, I want to give you a tsunami of thanks for your support and sharing the podcast with us and these wonderful reviews. And what I want you to know is that we welcome your critiques too. That this is a space that we want to share with you as well. And so, as ministers, we are concerned about what you're concerned about. So send you your concerns, your interests, people you think should be on the show, and give us a shout out.
Now, I agree with Reverend Irene Monroe about sharing this space with you, but send your concerns to her. allrevduppod@gmail.com. Sign them to Irene Monroe with your critiques. I'm just playing. We absolutely love you all. We love our producers, and this is a great opportunity for us to share in this conversation. So Irene, you mentioned the term twindemic. What is a twindemic, or in this season, what are you defining as twindemic?
In this season right now, I'm defining it as COVID-19 and racism. And when we hit the flu season, it will be for us as African Americans a tridemic.
Now, you mentioned the flu season. There's an old saying that when non-Black folks catch the flu, then Black folks get pneumonia.
Absolutely.
And we've seen that with this twindemic, that the SARS virus, the COVID-19, does not discriminate. It's a global pandemic. It's all across the world. But the healthcare in this country, there's a disparity in terms of who gets treated better than others. And in the death toll, we see people of color's numbers rising. So you have done over 70 Zoom funerals to date. What is that like?
Well, interestingly enough, it's pretty pathetic. It's pretty pathetic, and it's very, very sad. And one of the things is that people don't understand when they say, well, X number of people have died. With each body comes a face, a family, and a community. And so what is happening, because we are hit so disproportionately, that this twindemic has upended the rituals, and the way in which you and I, Emmett, do pastoral care to a grieving and bereaved community. And so what I hope that, what we're doing,
So we're not able to gather in the ways that we used to. Someone dies, and their home or the family home becomes a gathering space even before you get to a wake. That's right. Then you move from there to the wake, which precedes the homegoing celebration.
That's right.
So on the Black side of town, we don't necessarily have funerals. We're sending that body, that vessel, back to their creator. In the Christian faith, we use, back to God, right? So God blessed us with that individual, and now we're celebrating their life, right? From their birth date to their death date. And now we send them back to God, and we celebrate all of their contributions, all of the fact that they mean so much to us, which is why it hurts so much.
Right. And, and as pastoral care, our goal is really to help people through a valley, really, of anxiety, fear, and grief. But another part of our role in this moment is funeralizing our community. And we have to do it with a certain kind of dignity. We do it with a certain kind of aesthetic. There are different types of Black funerals that we have. But, the interesting thing that I've been dealing with, in doing these funerals here is that, there's a serious immediate disconnect once you get off of Zoom. And so what I'm trying to do and have been trying to do is to give as much dignity, to shape it around the specifics of the person.
You mentioned the Zoom piece, and this is really interesting because for Black folks, funerals tend to be family reunions. As a matter of fact, and maybe I can be use a little levity here. Sometimes funerals end up being places where you meet family that you didn't know existed, right? So
the only time you see family.
It's the only time you see family, but sometimes you read that obituary and there's an extra son or there's a former wife, or there's an extra somebody who you didn't know existed. And so
or
now we're
mistress,
looking around,
mistress.
or a plus one, right?
Yeah,
And so, it's interesting that through Zoom, that level of proximity and intimacy, to actually patch up previous rifts, or to get closer to cousins or whatnot, it's a lot difficult to do during a Zoom, funeral experience.
Yeah, one of the things that I certainly have had to deal with is that, I mean, it dwarfs. Let me tell you the good things it does. It dwarfs distances, and when you think about, you got a cousin down in North Carolina, you up here in Boston, and you got someone in Chicago. It really dwarfs distances. It also allowed people who would not come to the funeral come and pay their respects. But I tell you what is very, very hard doing Zoom funerals. There are two things that's hard. Once you disconnect, you're disconnect. So you don't have the repass. That's number one. The other thing about a Zoom funeral that is very, very hard is you can't do pastoral care, because a lot of times folks have said to me that, I hope I'm not next. And so as a pastor, I would be coming to your house, sitting with you, grieving with you. And you certainly can't do that.
Yeah. What's interesting, in non-COVID times, there were professional mourners. There were folks who showed up to the funerals, and you're wondering,
casket.
Well, yeah, I mean, that too. And you're wondering, like, what is your proximity to the person who passed away? Because you were just here last week, and you were here the week before, and I'm not seeing the proximity or the intimacy of the person. Are you here for a meal, right? Are you here to just be a part of a community? So, Irene, are you finding professional mourners who are showing up to these Zoom rooms? Because, before COVID, you had folks who showed up to funerals and they didn't even know the deceased. I mean, they just, pop up and they're the ones who are wailing and crying. They're the ones who are falling over caskets and into caskets. I mean, do they have places in Zoom where these folks can gather?
Well, let me say a few things about that. One of the things clearly is that to do a Zoom, you have to get a link. That's number one. Number two, here, I just have to say here, we joke about long funerals. Well, these funerals are not long. I mean, I as I was sharing with someone, I had watched a Medea family funeral just this weekend, and we will all remember the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, which was, I think, 3 days with a change of outfits. So no, these are really tight and disconnected and disembodied kind of funerals. And I need to say this, is that it doesn't allow us to address the grief. Yeah. And that's the thing that we have to talk about, grief on top of grief. And when I say on top of grief, I'm talking about the pandemic of racism, and now the COVID taking the lives of us disproportionately. So that's the thing that bothers me here. I'm not able to do the grief work. And what bothers me is that not only are we now dealing with generational grief, but we're dealing with household grief, people worrying, will they be next? And that's one of the complaints and concerns and laments that I have received from folks when I have done these funerals.
What's interesting, you talk about grief, and grief comes in many forms and shapes and sizes. Our young people are grieving the fact that they are going to school digitally, not all of them, but many of them. Some of our young people are grieving the fact that their sports seasons have been either truncated or been disrupted. A number of folks are grieving the fact that they can't work the way that they used to, that they aren't able to, be as effective. Some of our parents are grieving the fact that their kids are home while they're trying to work. And so there are all kinds of dreams and goals and objectives that have been kind of disrupted in this season. There's a grief around that, in addition to the death. And the death toll is huge.
Right.
So
in addition also to the stigma.
Yeah.
So this is the problem that is happening, and it reminds me of AIDS, because of the negative association of having this virus. Mm. So you don't tell your neighbors. Mm-hmm. You go on the down low with this here. You're afraid to go into the hospital, particularly if it's one of those hospitals that it's a community hospital and everybody knows you. Mm. And so what we have here is that here are people who disproportionately don't get health care. Some will think that they can sort of weather it out. And by the time many of them have, actually go to the doctor, it's much too late, because this is a virus not to play with. And so what I'm trying to do when someone says to me, Rev, I worry if I'm next, and I say, go get tested. They're worried about getting tested, because in one sense, if they know the result, they have to do something, particularly if it's positive. And if they don't know the results, they sit in anxiety.
Well, that anxiety is huge. The depression is huge. And the reality is that there are less and less and less resources and assistance for folks who are struggling with anxiety, particularly if they were not diagnosed with anxiety before COVID-19,
right.
and don't necessarily know the signs and don't
That's right.
know how to wrestle with that. And then, of course, depression. You talk about stigmas. There's all kind of stigmas around depression.
Mm-hmm.
And folks, who are not familiar with clinical diagnoses and, some of the ways that we can treat it, and not necessarily all by medicine. There
That's
are
right.
other ways that we can treat, depression, and not necessarily you and I. We're not professional clinicians, but we certainly can refer to
right.
folks who
That's right.
are
Right.
skilled in
And
that.
that's right. And so what happens is we talk about these 5 stages of grief, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of grief. But what happens with folks in COVID, they don't even have time to grieve.
Yeah.
Okay. And our community, because many of them are frontline workers, they don't have the luxury of working at home here and stuff. They don't have not only the time to take care of their health and as well as to grieve. Many of them in many ways are actually get into a state of denial about it.
You are listening to the All Rev'd Up podcast. We're talking about grief today. We'll be right back. That was the United House of Prayer Band playing It Will Never Lose Its Power. You're listening to the All Rev'd Up podcast. Irene, one of the things that when you talk about Black grief, there's something about the communal essence of the New Orleans jazz funeral, particularly the old school version of it, where when a person died, the folks would, prepare the body at the home, and then they would caravan through the streets. And of course, in New Orleans, there was a second line. The family would actually hire a band, a brass band, to play, and then folks would second line behind them with the umbrellas. So as folks came out of their homes, they joined the second line because there was already a band there, and folks were back there with their umbrellas waving to celebrate the folks, and they would go to the highest plane where the cemetery was, and as they laid the person to rest, the music would play. And many people think that the music was the most important part of that, but it wasn't. It was building community as the entire neighborhood came together to pay respects for the deceased. We're not able to do that right now. We're not able to build community right now.
But you know what, though, still the particular aesthetics of Black funerals are still going on, because they still, to me, I see them sort of as a radical testament of Blackness. It's very, very interesting how they started out, because during slavery we couldn't funeralize our own. I mean, they were overseen by an overseer, a white gaze, and then believe it or not, it really was during the Civil War, because because we had Black soldiers, and nobody would funeralize those bodies but the community. But you know what happened from that? It developed a particular skill. Okay, the Black and business, the Black funeral parlors. So I mean, and that had, listen, the liturgy has a certain style. I mean, it's something that still in many ways is subversive, because during slavery it was subversive. As a matter of fact, what they don't tell us in the books is that a lot of times those slave insurrections was doing a funeral.
That's right.
So, that's right. There was this slave named Gabriel. They were funeralizing an enslaved child. Okay, the whole community came, but it turned into being an insurrection, as well as it's an opportunity to for many to run away towards freedom. So that's why you got the white overseas. So it has a unique style. I mean, listen, it has a certain liturgy. Listen, when I say aesthetic, Okay, listen, it's like it is like going to church. A certain dress, a certain type of music, what you say, the professional mourner who fall, or wait a minute, everybody's got that family member, okay, that falls into the casket, or wait, or
Yeah.
better yet, hits the body and say, wake up. Wake up. So we
Yeah.
have a particular style of how we do it, but the whole point is that it's collective grief. What we do is allow this kind of collective grief with this unique style of lamenting together, yet at the same time celebrating. And the reason why we do that, and that has a history, of course, it goes back to slavery, but it has a lot to do with how we live even today. That it doesn't matter how long you live, because we understand our lives are shortened not only because of these social determinants like health disparity and environmental racism, but our children. We're getting shot down in the streets of America. So it allows us to come together, as you say, as a community and celebrate that particular life that leaves us with a certain legacy, a certain light that they've been here. So
Well, you're talking about legacy. Let me tell you about legacy as a black church musician,
all right, all
right?
right.
And because the black funeral becomes a training ground,
Mm,
because in that black funeral you got some singers
mm-hmm.
who will modulate your key, and if you're a good musician, you can go with them.
All
Uh,
right.
and if you're not a good musician, you keep playing on black funerals, and you will become a good one, right? And there's something about black preaching at black funerals. I mean, folks,
Mm.
that's where you learn how to preach, because if you don't preach well at a black funeral, somebody's gonna toss their shoe at you, because that's where folks come from out of the woodworks to hear what thus saith the Lord,
Yeah,
and to hear what you are going to say about the deceased. So
yeah,
you're right about the liturgy and the particular nuances of the black funeral.
yeah.
That's something particular
It's
about that.
it's the void of the white gaze. It was that moment that if that person walked through life feeling like nobody, you were somebody to us. And we come and thank you for however long you have been here. And it's very, very different. It doesn't matter who, what you do. It doesn't matter about your vocation, who you know, your family legacy. Funerals remind me of this particular moment with Shirley Caesar and Fighting Temptation, because it's about the community coming together. And her song, which is just beautiful, she says, the church is in mourning. It is the whole idea that, yes, we are in mourning, but we're also in celebration of this life that lived among us. So, it's very, very interesting. New Orleans has a particular style, but, but we still don't lose the central part of what Black funerals are about. Interestingly enough, you're from that area, your family is, and white New Orleans didn't appropriate that style.
Yes, there's a big difference between the ethnic experiences there in New Orleans, from folks who are indigenous, from folks who are black, and folks who are not black. But one of the things that I want to really press in before we depart here is that in this season there are folks to talk to,
Yeah.
and please make sure that you press in on working through your own grief, because in this season we are triggered, and in
Mm-hmm.
many ways we begin to think about those who have gone on long ago,
That's
and
right.
the memories of them come back, and we have to learn how to process that. We have to learn how to get out of our own heads. And so the fears that you mentioned, the anxieties that you mentioned, the depression that we had talked about, we have to really learn how to work through them and work beyond the stigmas. And
Yeah.
so there are faith leaders, there are non-faith leaders, there are professional folks who we can process things with, who we can talk with, depending on your comfort. But I
Right.
encourage our listeners today, if you are struggling with grief, or you don't even know that you're struggling with it, but you have thoughts and
That's
thinking
right.
about, some of these things, we encourage you to seek some support.
Right. And we know that this is a difficult topic. We one of the things is that we don't like to talk about this subject, and I've always asked, a number of folks, well, ministers like you, Emmett, why don't we talk about death and dying? But I think part of it is because our life is always navigating death and dying due to racism. I mean, it's sort of like having that talk with our child. Back in the day, we had to try to run away from lynching, and even today we still don't have a lynching bill, although we have a lynching museum. So we're always navigating life and death, and that's that persistent sort of pandemic that I'm hoping in this inflection point, due to George Floyd's death, we can begin to address those issues and begin to live a full life. The life, as they say in the Constitution, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness here.
Well, I'm hoping that we will get to the place where we can stop viewing spontaneous capital punishment on our phones and through social media. I'm praying that we get to that place where we can see these senseless murders no more. Irene, you have a final word for us. Let us hear it.
So this is my homegoing benediction. Birth is a beginning. Death is a destination, and life is a journey. We mourn and celebrate as an act of prayer and praise for one's life. While they may be gone from our sight, they are never gone from our hearts. And those we love never truly leave us, because there's something that even death cannot touch, and that's our memories with them. We give praise for our loved ones who have gone home, for the gift of their life with us, for the strength on which we have leaned on them, for the lessons we have learned from them, and the beauty of their presence, for the power of their love, for the light that will never leave us. Their love will continue to enfold us. The power of their wisdom will continue to guide us. And the presence of their legacy will continue to be with each of us. Amen.
Amen.
And Ashe.
Ashe. All Rev'd Up is brought to you by us, the Revs. Our amazing producers are Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
Music for this episode is brought to you by Reverend Price's son, musical prodigy Emmett G. Price IV. All Rev'd Up is distributed by GBH.
Additional thanks to Bob Kempf, Nina Perzuki, Chelsea Mers, Meredith Nierman, and Zack Waldman.
If you like what you hear, let us know. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us at All Rev'd Up Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Feel free to send us a note, a question, or a comment to allrevduppod@gmail.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of All Rev'd Up.